Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
This week we go back to the Shudder service for a Shudder exclusive film, I believe, right? Or at least it was at one time.
Yeah, I don't think Shudder made this movie, but I think that they currently have the exclusive rights to it.
All right, that's what it is. That's how we get to see it anyway, and how you can see it too, if after our conversation today you were so moved. This film Craig picked out this week called Summer of '84. I never heard of it before. I don't have a subscription to Shudder. I just share yours. And I'm not on there too often, so but they've got a lot of good stuff on there. I feel like we should be getting money from them for as much as we've been promoting their service lately on our show. But this is a 2018 Canadian horror mystery film directed by three people, Francois Simard, Anouk Wissel, and Johan Carl Wissel, who haven't actually done much before this, have done a movie called Turbo Kid or something, and
which I've heard really good things about. It's on Shudder too, and I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard it's really cool.
It's also a horror movie?
Yeah, well, I've heard it kind of described as like Mad Max with kids.
Oh.
And I think it's like really violent, and I don't know. It's something I want to check out eventually.
Okay. It did premiere, not Turbo Kid, but Summer of '84 did premiere at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and did have a limited release in theaters in August 2 years ago. So most of the critics seem to really like this movie and praise it. If you go on Rotten Tomatoes, I think it's over 70% positive on that. And it is clearly, if you can't tell by the title, it's clearly it's fan service for people who like 80s movies, right? It's your classic kids go on a summer adventure movie akin to Goonies and Monster Squad and those kind of things. It's also very similar to The Burbs, except with kids.
Right.
And the general premise is that this group of kids, or particularly this one kid named Davey, starts to believe that his neighbor across the street, who's also a police officer, happens to be a serial killer in their city, their town of Cape May, I believe it's called. Cape May, Oregon is what it's supposed to be. There's a bunch of killings that have been going on. A lot of kids have been going missing and have been apparently for years. And he thinks that his neighbor is one of them. So I thoroughly enjoyed watching this movie. Maybe I enjoyed it a little too much simply because it was directly feeding me, little bits and snippets and pieces of 1984, kind of in the same vein as Stranger Things does, but is a little different. So, I was really happy that you proposed this film, Craig, and I enjoyed watching it. Had you seen it before, or had you heard of other things about it before we watched it?
No, I just came across it on Shudder. You're right. They should be paying us because I talk. They should just be paying me personally because I'm telling everybody I know, you got to get on there because there's some really good stuff, and their exclusive and original content I've actually just been really impressed by. Plus, they've got tons of old horror and stuff too. But you're right, this is definitely fan service for those of us who are fans of horror from the 80s. The vibes you already mentioned, like Monster Squad for sure, the Goonies. In subject matter, very reminiscent of Rear Window and Fright Night. Even like some E.T. vibes. It's a total throwback to our childhood and adolescence. These boys hang out in a tree house. They ride their bikes everywhere. They play neighborhood games. For my neighborhood, it was always Capture the Flag, but they play this game called Manhunt, which is kind of seems like the same thing. There's so much 80s here.
Shameless, actually.
It is. But I loved it. And these guys, this group of guys, some of them you'll recognize from other things. To be honest, it's been a few weeks since I watched this, but one of the guys, I think it's the guy named Eats, who's played by Judah Lewis. That's the kid from The Babysitter, right?
Yep.
Which we also talked about.
Yep, he's the one.
Yeah. And I really liked him in that movie, and a couple of the other guys are kind of familiar too. There's, of course, like the kind of nerdy one, Faraday. Woody is the heavyset one, who also he's a great big guy. These kids are supposed to be what, like No, 15. Is that right? 15.
I guess, yeah.
They're supposed to be 15, and for the most part, I mean, they look pretty young. I don't know how old they are in real life, but they seem the boys are good enough actors and have good enough chemistry that you really just buy them as friends.
Yeah.
And as much as, you know, they do go on kind of this mystery adventure, there's also just a lot of cute and sometimes tender moments between these guys too. And I was just really happy to go on this ride with them, which is fun, but ultimately becomes high stakes and gets pretty scary at points.
Yeah.
So I do think that it falls... you know, it is mostly a mystery, but we definitely get some horror elements, especially in the last half hour or so.
Yeah, I would say the last half hour definitely takes a turn that it wasn't a turn I was not expecting, but I think the tone I was definitely not expecting. It does get very, very dark and actually has a very bleak ending, which, you know, as I was watching this movie, as we've talked about before, my wife is not particularly fond of scary movies as your partner. In this sense, I was watching it thinking, oh, this was something we could have sat down and watched together and really enjoyed. And then by the time we got to the end of it, I thought, nah, she would have hated me by the end of this. Darn it, the first hour was, you know, quite charming and sweet, and then the last 20 minutes or so, it suddenly gets very dark. So this would have been something I think could have been rated, I don't know what it is rated. Is it PG-13 or is it actually R? Probably R. It's got a bunch of F-bombs. It's a little dark at the end.
I'm guessing R.
Yeah, could have been PG-13 if it weren't for how it ends, I think, I would say. So.
Well, and another thing that I thought was good about it is that it kept me guessing. I wasn't sure. You know, you laid out the basic premise. It opens up with the main kid, Davey, doing his paper route on his bike. And over that, he's got a monologue where he talks about even serial killers live next door to somebody. The suburbs are where the craziest stuff happens. And like you said, these boys have gone missing. We don't even really know that at first. He delivers a paper to his neighbor, and his neighbor is a cop whose last name is Mackey, which is what they always call him. I don't even know what his first name is.
Wayne.
And this guy, he doesn't look too particularly imposing. In fact, he's kind of a chubby guy, and he seems friendly. But he invites Davey in. Davey gets his attention because he needs paid. He hasn't paid for his paper subscription or whatever. And he's like, oh yeah, sorry, I'll get you your money or whatever. But while you're here, can you come in and help me lift something? And this is exactly what we were warned against in the 80s. You know what I mean? Like, never get into a car with a stranger, we were warned about these things, and then at the same time, our parents would send us door to door to sell things for school.
Yeah.
And like, we would totally interact with strangers all the time.
There was a real dichotomy there.
Yeah, total mixed messages in the 80s. So Davey goes in, and the house seems pretty normal. There's a lot of family photos on the wall, and he says something like, big family, huh? And he's like, yeah, but I don't really have any family around here, you know, which is good because they're not stopping by all the time. He's like, but I need you to help me carry this thing down into the basement. I don't even remember what it was, some big, like, cabinet or something. And they go down there, and it's just kind of creepy because it's a basement, and they're alone. And Davey notices a padlocked room down there, and there's another room that's lit in all red.
I am putting the finishing touches on my dark room. Sort of an amateur photographer. I figured that this beast could help store some equipment.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm sort of an amateur videographer, so I get it.
Just like the old man. My God, I remember when your parents would push you around the block in a stroller. Now look at you. How old are you anyway?
15.
15. It's the perfect age. I wish I could just freeze it for you.
You know, and of course I know that this is a scary movie, so everything is suspect. And so that line made me pause, like, that's kind of creepy.
Yeah, I thought that too. This guy's played by Rich Sommer, who, I don't know if you recognize him from anything. I really enjoyed him as Harry Crane in Mad Men. And he has this real personality. The guy's actually quite good at comedy, But he's really good at just playing this nice, kind of affable, friendly, everyday dude. And like you said, you feel like because you're watching a horror movie, you're looking for these clues, and you're suspect of everybody who you come across and what their motivations might be. And right away, you're kind of being set up for this guy to be a suspicious character in the movie. But at the same time, you know that's a trope, right?
Right.
So you're always wondering, is this film going to subvert my expectations? Is it toying with me? And I think this actor in this role does a very good job of riding that line so that you never really know whether he's hiding something or whether he's just this affable guy. But he is quite amiable to the kids and really friendly. And the interesting thing about it is that as the movie goes on, you really get this sense that this guy's a kid at heart.
Uh-huh.
There are a lot of these subtle clues, not so subtle clues actually, of how he interacts with the neighborhood boys as a police officer and just out on his front porch. There's a scene later where he's just sitting out on his porch watching the kids across the street playing ball, and he brings out a cooler full of, like, I don't know, ice pops or something. And says, hey, who wants one? They come over and grab them, and he just sits there and smiles. And, you know, this is the kind of thing and the kind that I think maybe we're overly sensitive to nowadays. Oh,
yeah.
You know, single man likes kids and, you know, lives by himself and goes out of his way to give them candy and invite them over. I think back then probably we were a little sensitive to it too. Our parents were, but not as much as we are now.
Well, and I think that kind of what the movie is playing on is then, and even to an extent now, you don't suspect your neighbors. You know, it's always somebody else. You know, it's not the nice guy who lives next door. That doesn't make any sense. It's somebody else. This happens to other people in other places. Of course, that's not true, which is why the kid says in the beginning, even serial killers live next door to somebody.
It's like, ding, 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 in case you don't know where this movie's going. Well, and also he's got this history with the kids, right? I mean, flat out, the last time I saw you, you know, you were this high, or I was helping your dad with something. So it's not like he's a new guy in town either.
Right.
Right? So that's another thing.
Yeah, he's been there since they were little kids.
And a police officer.
Yeah, and he's a cop. Right, exactly. But that night, the boys, and not just our main group of boys, but like the whole neighborhood of boys are out playing this manhunt game at night in the dark. But Davy sees a curly-haired boy in Mackie's kitchen, and then somebody like startles him and he looks away, and when he looks back, the kid's not there anymore. But Davy's into conspiracy theories anyway. Like, he's got his whole room is lined with newspapers, like crime stories, and then we get some cute setup. You know, the kids bike around to Cruel Summer, which, you know, is super 80s, total throwback to Karate Kid. We're introduced to, there's another neighbor girl who's a little older than them, named Nikki, who they all have kind of a crush on, and she's cute, pretty girl. But then the serial killer story breaks. And apparently this has been going on for a while, but the police have now gotten a letter from somebody who has said they are doing this, and they signed it the Cape May Slayer. And on the profile, they say it's probably a white male, probably between 30 and 40, probably living alone, targets boys 14 to 15 years old. And eventually, there's a thing where one of their friends from the neighborhood, Sammy, and his family have been gone for a while, but their car is still there, and they think that's weird. But then when it really amps up is when Davy sees the curly-haired boy that he had seen in Mackie's house. He sees him on a milk carton. And so at that point, he is convinced that Mackie's the Cape May Slayer. Even though his friends are initially skeptical, he says, no, that's it. Nobody would ever suspect a cop. And so that's when they basically start spying on him, and they track his schedule and check out his mail and his garbage and all kinds of things. And yeah, I mean, that's a good part of it. It's just them kind of watching him. Yeah, it's just so classic for these kind of movies. And as you said before, the movie's just dripping with references to 80s. And so what we're getting for this first half hour is this pretty long, protracted setup.
where we're introduced to these characters and these kids are meeting, and they're meeting in a tree house. I mean, this is all quite classic. But like you said, it's really more about getting to know these boys and their relationships. And as you get to know the boys, and again, one thing I appreciate about this movie was it wasn't really thrown in our face, and a lot of it was just kind of offhand. But all of them, almost all of them, have a little bit of problems at home. Eats is the kid who's got kind of wear the slacks clothes and longer hair and listens to like heavy metal or hair bands or whatever, and clearly has some issues with his parents fighting at home. And the overweight kid you mentioned earlier, Woody, he's got some problems at home with his mom. His mom is always depressed and upset. Was she divorced? What was the deal with her? Was she?
I don't think we really know, but I actually really liked the way that the movie handled this.
Yeah.
I thought that it was kind of surprisingly sophisticated in some way. Like, usually, these kids, like in the Goonies, they all have this problem where their neighborhood is getting bought out, by the rich people in town or whatever. But here, these kids kind of have real issues. Now, Faraday, the dorky one, it seems like his family's very normal. And Davy's family is pretty normal. But, like you said, Eats, it seems like he comes from maybe, I don't know, an abusive household, but definitely a lot of tension there. You hear his parents screaming at each other from inside. His brother's also kind of an older loser. But and everybody, they're super horny all the time. They're all the time looking at nudie magazines and like humping on each other and stuff, which is funny.
Yeah. Cracking jokes about getting tail and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and looking at the neighbor girl through binoculars out the window, and it all very classic 80s stuff. But Eats is all the time making sexual remarks about Woody's mom. And every time he does, Woody's like, dude, don't talk about my mom like that. It's not funny. And, we used to razz each other like that when we were kids.
Yeah, mom jokes was just a thing.
Yeah, you see, just in a very brief moment, Woody asks, I think he asked Davy if he can spend the night. And Davy says, yeah, and Woody goes home to get his stuff. And his mom is there, and she's, I think, a waitress. She's in some sort of uniform, and she's just sitting on the couch crying and drinking and smoking. And he lays her down and covers her up and says, it's going to be okay. And she just looks at him and says, you're so good. And it was sad. Like, you just kind of get the sense that this woman has problems, whether she's struggling with divorce or if her husband left or if she's just struggling with being a single mom or whatever it is. She's not doing well. And you see why Eats makes all these sexual jokes about her, because she's beautiful. She's young and gorgeous. But you also see why Woody would take not offense, but why it would bother him, because his mom has problems. It's just a little bit more true to life than your typical 80s fare.
Yeah.
Maybe that's more of a 2020 sensibility in the filmmaking. I don't know, but I liked it.
I did too. Well, it also kind of works well with the theme, right? I mean, a lot of these movies, the suburbs was this idyllic place where all these crazy adventures happen, but everything kind of ends up okay, and kids are having fun and playing outside. Not to say that, there haven't been conflict in those 80s movies. I mean, the Karate Kid, but in general, that tended to be the feel of the movies and of the eras that kind of came before it. Dennis the Menace and Lassie and stuff. Like, the suburbs are just this nice, fun, happy place. And so from the beginning monologue, and then, like you said, very sophisticated and subtly introducing these problems and showing you that all these kids, they have other considerations besides their adventure, real life crap that they have to deal with, that people from the suburbs and who live out in these nice manicured lawns are not immune to. And I think that just plays in well with the theme of the movie. It's cute because he's looking out the window at this girl across the street whose name is Nikki, and like you said, she's like a couple years older. I think she's probably about to graduate.
Yeah.
She talks later about how she's going to go to Stanford.
She used to babysit him when he was younger, so they've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, and so they have this little history, and they kind of talk about how cute she is, and he looks out the window at her, and at one point, she looks back at him, and she sees that he's looking at her. Then there's this really great moment a little later when she comes over. This is the time, actually, when you said that that Woody was supposed to come over to his house. He's waiting for Woody to come over. And when he opens the door, he thinks it's Woody, but it's her. And she just walks inside, and his parents happen to be gone. And she helps herself to a soda from the fridge, and she's being very suggestive. And she goes upstairs to his bedroom and picks up the binoculars and looks out the window. And
Huh. Better view of my room than I thought.
I've never seen you naked.
It's too bad. I've got a great body.
Yeah, she's being very flirty with him, which I didn't know what to think at first. In fact, the first time I watched this movie, I've seen it twice. I watched it again for the podcast, but the first time I watched it, I didn't know what was going on with her. And in fact, I thought she was a little shady.
yeah.
And I kept questioning. I maybe even thought that she was
Somehow
in on
involved.
it.
Yeah, me too.
When I say in on it, like, I didn't know exactly what was going on, but if there was something going on, I thought maybe she was in on it. Because she always kind of pops up at surprising times, too.
Yeah, I had the same suspicions. I mean, I thought his parents were in on it at some point, because there are little things that happen there too, you know, where they kind of allude to the past, or the neighbor across the street that the police officer we were talking about was up in their attic helping them move things. So there's some times when his parents exchange looks with each other that you're kind of wondering what's going on. There's a little bit, I think, of suspicion cast on everybody, or maybe it's just the paranoia of me watching a movie like this and expecting a twist.
Right.
You know? But yeah, she's really... It's really hard to know what she's getting at here with him in the bedroom.
As it turns out, she's just kind of toying with him because they do have this previous relationship. And ultimately, they really become and remain friendly. And that part, there's a part of me that's like, that's not believable. The pretty 17-year-old girl is not going to be chummy with this geeky little 15-year-old boy. But then I was like, yeah, they've known each other for a really long time. They have a history. And so I do believe it.
I think the circumstances were what really preempted that. I mean, when when she talks to him, she opens up and says, we're going to be moving.
Because her parents are getting a divorce.
Yeah. And you know, again, this is another like 80s.
Well, I was just going to say, and we had heard that because Davy's parents had been talking about it, and the mom had said something like, oh my gosh, I had no idea they were even having problems. And the dad says, well, that's why curtains were invented, which again goes back to that, what you had said before, kind of the whole theme. You never really know what goes on behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Yes, the suburbs are kind of this facade of normalcy and safety, but you really never know what's going on behind closed doors. And her experience mirrors that too. And ultimately, she is reaching out to Davy because she just needs somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Like, to kind of work through this stuff. And they do. Periodically throughout the movie, they just get together and hang out and talk. And it's really sweet.
Yeah, it's sweet, and they don't kiss or anything. I mean, it's just, like you said, it's like her about to go through all these changes. And I thought this was very 80s. I mean, I don't mean to downplay divorce. Divorce can be very tough on children, but I think especially in the 80s, we felt like this was kind of like the end of the world, or at least the media was telling us that this does irreparable damage to your children and your families. And I know that, you know, it was a scandalous thing at that time that two people would get divorced, and this was a theme, you know, so this being a throwback movie, that really kind of fits. But what do? You know, I mean, she's about to go off to college. She's going to go to Stanford. They're going to move. Her parents are getting a divorce. So she goes back. She retreats back to the nostalgia of when she remembered better times, and that was her friend across the street. So
Right.
I felt like the motivation was quite good. But as you said, you don't know this right away. So you're very suspicious and wondering, why is she so eager to come over and talk with him and be alone in his room, and kind of why are they sneaking around? Of course, his friends are totally impressed by it. That's kind of cool for him. That doesn't always happen.
Well, and it's cute. You know, one of the early times that they're talking, he confides in her what they're doing, and she tells him, oh, you're crazy. You know, he's a cop. And Davy's like, yeah, but, and she's like, no, he's friends with my dad. Like, you know, like, again, it's that we know this guy. And she encourages him to stop. She's like, you're going to get caught. You're going to get in trouble. And he says, no, I won't. And they don't quit. Like I said, they go through his mail, they go through his trash, but they never really find anything. Eventually they go back to that house where their friend lives, but he's been gone for a while. They break in and they look around, and there's a jump scare because Nikki is in there. And again, I was like, what is she doing in there? It seems super shady, but she just says, they're on vacation. They rented a camper. I'm taking care of their cats, which is totally believable. I was still suspicious, but totally believable. But it was also cute in that moment because Nikki and Davy are talking, and the friends are surprised because they thought that he was bullshitting them, that he had been spending time with her. And they're like, whoa, it's true. And I thought it was adorable. She totally plays it up for him. Like, she says something like, he's more of a man than you guys will ever be. And she gives him a little kiss on the cheek and walks around. And they all, these little teenage boys kind of have this, oh, yeah! Like, they're giving each other high fives. And she's just standing around the corner smiling. And I just thought, how cute. But having seen The Babysitter, it kind of gave me that vibe too. I'm like, is she going to sacrifice him to the devil later? I don't know.
Sorry, spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen The Babysitter yet. Well, I think this is the thing that it wasn't maddening to me because I was just in the right frame of mind to watch this movie and to go through this with them. But I will admit, and I think some of the criticism that some people have said online about it is a little slow. The build-up's a little slow. And it's true because the guys go over and they go through his trash. They really don't find anything. They follow his car. They see that he's getting shovels and dirt, but they don't really find anything. They go to the neighbor's house. They don't really find anything, So it's just a lot
They plant a walkie-talkie outside his window. They don't really find anything.
Exactly. Like, he's digging up his garden. That's the whole thing. He's buying tons and tons of dirt, apparently, and a pickaxe and a shovel, and they're figuring he's burying bodies in his backyard because he's building a garden back there, but it's clearly a shitty garden. And they climb up to plant the walkie-talkie, like you said, but that kind of gets foiled. And he sees them outside the window. Like there's a kind of a scare where they're creeping around looking in his window. And one of them climbs the trellis up to his bedroom window where they're going to try to plant this cheap-ass G.I. Joe walkie-talkie. And he's up there with like bleach and gloves and cleaning supplies and things. And
it looks like he has blood on his shirt.
Yeah. And he kind of goes down and they say, oh, he's going to the basement. And the other kid runs down to the basement on the outside, of course, and sees that the windows are blacked over. And then at that moment, they're looking in the windows and boom, he sees Davy through the window and Davy runs off. And their whole thing is like, look, if we get caught, we're just going to say we were playing manhunt. And so that's, excusable or whatever. So Davy realizes that he has left the walkie-talkie there, that they didn't make it up to the window, but it was stuck in the trellis. So he goes back over, and of course the neighbor confronts him.
Davey. Hey. Gotta say, you scared the hell out of me last night.
Yeah, we were, sorry about that. We were just playing manhunt. I didn't expect you there.
No, I get it. A lot of good hiding spots for manhunt.
Yeah, your yard's full of them.
Guess you didn't see me coming either, though. So what's up? Wait. Let me guess. I owe you money.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm ready for you this time. Come on back.
And Davy notices the walkie-talkie there, and Mackie looks at Davy, and Davy's walkie-talkie that he has on his belt kind of goes off. And he looks down at it and he says, oh, were you guys playing with that walkie-talkie? It's kind of cheap. It doesn't get a good range. I've got some awesome walkie-talkies inside. Obviously, they're cop radios. And he said, they pick up everything. You're welcome to use them if you want. And he's like, no.
Just come inside with me and I'll get them for you.
And to his credit, he's still very cautious. He's like, no, I'm not going to go inside. No, that's okay. No, maybe later. He's like, all right, well, whenever you want it, just go. And so, he leaves. And still at this point, you're not sure, but you're kind of wondering, how is this neighbor? Is he real? Is he not?
And the stuff, everything that's going on could have a rational explanation. The guy gardens. Yeah, there's a big mound of dirt in his garden. It could be a grave. It could just be a garden. That night after this second meeting, Davy is up looking through his window with his binoculars, and across the way he sees Mackie looking back at him through binoculars.
Yeah.
Which freaks him out, but whatever, dude, you're looking at him. Why shouldn't he be looking out his window with binoculars?
Right.
But it is suspenseful. It's creepy because we don't know. But he tells his friends, look, they're on to us. And so they set up this plan where Faraday and Woody follow Mackie. They know that he goes jogging every night at like 11:30. And then Eats and Davy, while he's gone, they dig up his garden, but they don't find anything. Faraday and Woody follow him on foot and see that he has this storage unit, and it's got a car in it, a Volkswagen in it, which I read was the same model that was Ted Bundy's car, but trivia. And like he jogs there, but then he leaves in the Volkswagen. They see that he's got a bunch of dirt and pickaxes and stuff in there. When Eats and Davy can't find anything in the ground, they break into his gardening shed, and Davy finds the missing boy's shirt with blood on it.
Yeah.
The boys that had followed Mackie report that he had sodium hydroxide in his storage unit, and they looked that up, and they said that it's used for breaking down organic tissue, and that it's often used to dissolve roadkill. So now they actually have some evidence, and Davey says, all right, guys, it's time to tell my parents.
I was not expecting this, by the way.
I wasn't either, but he's right.
Yeah. This is the
it
thing
is time to tell your parents.
This is the kind of thing they're supposed to do in these movies, and they never do. They never go to the police. They never tell their parents. Or they'll go to the police, but the police completely make fun of them. But in this case, yeah, they tell the parents, and the parents are like, what are you talking about? Immediately they dismiss it, and they say, this is crazy, and you've been sneaking around, and you've been digging up his garden, and you've been stealing his stuff. And Dad says, you're going to go over there and apologize right now. And they all have to go across the street. And his dad knocks on the door, and Mackie comes to the door, and Dad makes him apologize, just reveals everything that they did. And he doesn't even know everything that they did to them, right? Like digging up the garden and whatnot.
Well, if he does, he plays dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, he's so nice about it. He's like, I get it. He's like, I was into conspiracies when I was a kid too. He's like, it gets boring in the suburbs in the summer. You got to have something to do, a little mystery, And he's like, no hard feelings, no big deal. And the kid's like, well, but I saw this kid in your house. He's like, oh, that was my nephew. He was here for a visit. Come on in. We'll call him. He'll tell you. And they're like, no, it's okay. but he's basically like, look, it's totally fine. It's no big deal. I get it. No big deal.
Yeah.
But Davy's dad is like, well, they're going to fix everything that they broke. They're going to fix your garden. And Davy's grounded for the rest of the summer. And then there's a little bit, like, Davy talks to Nikki again, and she realizes that he's got caught, and she's like, see, I told you. But he's like, well, but if I'm right, who's going to stop him? And then I think maybe one of my favorite scenes, one of the most tense scenes, Davy's home alone. I assume his parents are at work, because it's during the morning, I think. And there's a knock on the door, and it's Mackie. And he's like, look, I just wanted to stop by and say there's no hard feelings. I don't want there to be any tension between us. And he's like, can I come in? And Davy's like, no. But he's like, listen, everything's cool. You don't have to be worried about anything. I promise you I'm going to do everything that I can to catch this bastard. And he says, is there anything that I can do to make you feel better? And Davy's like, well, you said before that you would call your nephew. Could you call him now? And he's like, yeah. And Davy's like, okay, hold on here. I'm going to go get the phone. Well, while he goes and gets the phone, Mackie comes in the house, which I thought was scary.
Yeah, because Davy had specifically said, no, it's okay. I'll get the phone for you. It's got a long cord. And he's like, all right, but he takes a few steps in anyway. Very scary.
And he's looking around, and Davy sees that he's come in, so he grabs a knife and he holds it behind his back. But he brings the phone to Mackie, and Mackie dials it, and he's like, they're in Ohio or something. I don't know. He calls the number, and it rings and rings and rings. He's like, Weird, they must not be home. If you want to come over later, we can try again later. And Davy's like, no, it's cool. And then Mackie leaves, and Davy is so smart. I never would have thought of this. He goes back to the phone, and he dials the operator, and he says, can you tell me what the last number was that was dialed from this line? And she does. The operator does. And he writes it down on a pad of phone numbers that's hanging on the refrigerator. And he looks, and they have a list of all of their neighbors' phone numbers, which we did in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Mackie's number. Mackie had dialed his own number. So at this point, I thought, well, he's obviously right.
Yeah.
You know, it must be him. But and so Davey calls all of his friends over that night, and he's like, look, guys, it really is him. And they're like, you know, we've already gotten in trouble for this. They're really reluctant. They don't want to do it anymore. And then the mom calls Davey down because there's a press conference, and they say that they have captured the Cape May Slayer or whatever. And guess who the arresting officer was?
Mm-hmm.
Mackie.
Yeah.
And Davey, you know, he tells his friends, look, it's not true. It's him. And they don't believe him, but they agree to help. And so while everybody else goes to this big Bay Festival, which is apparently a big thing for their town, Faraday is there with his parents, so he watches Mackie. Eats sits at a bus stop, I guess as a lookout in case Mackie comes home.
Yes.
I wasn't really sure about that. I was afraid at this point. I'm still second guessing. I think it's got to be Mackie, but then I'm like, well, what if it isn't? Because we didn't mention, but we've already seen one teenage boy get
Taken.
swiped off the street.
Yep.
Right? And so I was really worried that Eats was going to get kidnapped. But Woody and Davy break into Mackie's house with Davy's dad's video camera. Davy's dad is a news cameraman. And Nikki just happens to pop up, and she's there too. And so they're looking around in his house. Meanwhile, Faraday sees that Mackie has been helping these other cops do this big garden in the park for the Bay Festival. And he's like, oh, well, that explains everything. That explains all the dirt. It explains all the tools. And so he calls Davey on the walkie-talkie and says, you were wrong. I'll explain it later, but you're wrong. We're calling it all off. But Davey is still convinced. So they break into the basement, and it's spooky down there. And they break into the padlocked room, and it looks like a kid's bedroom.
Yeah. It's so weird.
And not just a kid's bedroom, but like a kid's bedroom from the past. Now, I'm guessing you mentioned earlier, and I had never really thought about it until you said it, but that Mackie seems to be kind of like a kid at heart. And I think you're right. I think that's kind of what the psychosis is here. I think that he's clinging to that somehow, which is why he still has his room set up like it was before or whatever. But there's nothing all that weird about it. I mean, it's just a bedroom. But then they notice another door. They open it up, and in there they find pictures of the missing kid. And then they find a body being dissolved in the tub. And then an arm reaches out and grabs one of them, and it's the kid that we saw get swiped off the street. So without question, it's for sure Mackie.
Yes.
And they all run upstairs, and before they run out, they look at the pictures on the wall that we had seen earlier, and they realize that it's not pictures of Mackie's family, it's pictures of all of his victims. And Davy sees a picture of his family there. So it seems pretty apparent that Mackie was grooming Davy, and that Davy was probably going to be next. Well, they go to the police, and the police, they have all the evidence, and they have it all on tape. We never see that kid again, but obviously that kid was still alive. He could tell them what happened. So they set out to arrest Mackie, but they can't find him. And this is where things not necessarily took a surprising turn, but I was surprised at how quickly and how dark it got. Because Mackie, who has been this affable kind of guy, shady, suspicious, but friendly, all of a sudden we see his true colors, and it's scary.
It is, and this is the point where the movie really subverts your expectations. He goes to the police, he's got the evidence, the police completely believe him, they go to find him, he's gone, but the police chief says to his parents, you should be proud of your son, he's a hero. If he hadn't been down there, this kid would have been dead. He just gets everything that he wants. And then the next scene is that the guy's still gone. Davey is at home, and he looks out his window, and the cops are across the street searching the house and all that.
And Woody's spending the night.
Yeah, Woody is spending the night, and the dad just looks in there and he says, "All right, well, we're gonna take good care of you guys. We're gonna keep a watch out for him. I'm sure they'll find him. It's gonna be fine." And he leaves.
You're safe now.
Yeah, and Davey looks out the window, and Woody comes over, and he says, "Do you think they'll catch him?" And Davey says, "There's nowhere left to hide. It's over." And I'm like, nope, because there's still about 15 minutes left in this movie.
Yep.
It's definitely not over. And sure enough, as they're sleeping, the camera creeps around through the hallway, and the attic opens up. And it's one of those attic doors where the ladder drops down, and these legs come down the ladder and very quietly creep into his room. And Davey gets chloroformed. And when he wakes up, he and Woody are in the back seat of a police car. They don't know where they are, and they wake up, and Davey is able to untie Woody's bonds, and they're able to kind of get free. And at that time, somebody starts smashing the window of the car, opens the window of the car, and, of course, Mackie is there terrorizing them, jumps at them through the window, and they run out the door into the woods. And he's on the speaker saying, okay, you guys want to play Manhunt. Now we're going to play Manhunt for real. And they start tearing off through the woods. Only they can't find a road or anything. They come to water, and then they turn and they come to water again, and they say, oh, my God, we're on the island. We're on the island in the middle of the bay or whatever. So this guy comes running after them and pursuing them. Davey is up against a tree, and Mackie cuts his what's that called? The heel there?
Achilles tendon.
His Achilles tendon.
While they're being chased, they come into this kind of marshy area,
Oh,
and
yes.
they see all these bones. This is clearly where Mackie has been disposing of his victims, and they're all dissolved and nasty and gross.
Yeah, he's not been too subtle about it, unfortunately. He should bury him a little deeper.
They're running around. They're just in their socks. They were in bed. He's nearby, and Woody says, I can't die tonight, Davey. My mom. And Davey says, you're not going to die tonight. And Davey takes off on his own and taunts Mackie so that he will follow him. And he does. Mackie does follow him, but like you said, he finally catches up to him, surprises him from the back, and cut his Achilles tendon. That never heals. I was like, that's the first thing I thought. Like, I don't know, maybe in 2020 there are things that they can do to repair that, but as far as I know, like, if your Achilles tendon is severed, it's very difficult to repair, and you're immediately hobbled. Like, you cannot walk on that leg if that happens. But he doesn't kill Davey right away. Instead, he heads back towards the car.
Woody
gets back to the car and is kind of standing there looking around, and Mackie attacks him from the back and slits his throat, and I was so upset.
Yes. This was supremely upsetting, this and the way it was shot and everything. I mean, first of all, this is the affable, likable, nice, overweight kid who's got the problems at home with his mom. I did not expect him to die in this movie.
No, he's also been the one who has been the most loyal to Davey throughout. Whereas the others were kind of like, we don't really want to. Woody was always there. Like, you're my best friend. I'm always going to have your back.
And the way...
I just didn't think it was going to happen.
No.
And, like, his poor, sad mom. Like,
and the way it's shot is so cruel. I mean, we're on the ground with him. He's facing the camera, and you don't even see Mackie. You just see him holding up his head, and he just takes that knife across his throat and starts to just basically bleed him out like a pig. And this is all in one unbroken take that we see from beginning to end. It's not glamorous at all. It's horrifying. Horrifying. And this, I mean, this is what I was like, oh my God. I could not believe the movie was going to get this dark. And
I couldn't either. I was really surprised.
yeah.
And sad, but on the other hand, kind of like, you know what? Good for you for going for it. I mean, that's
a horror movie.
How bad this guy is,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also thought that it was so creepy. Davey comes back and finds Woody's body, and then Mackie grabs Davey and throws him up against the car and is screaming at him.
You brought this on yourself. All you had to do was leave me alone. This is your goddamn fault.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You forced me out of my home. You stole my life! You do not need to be sorry. All I want to do is kill you. It's not enough for you. You have spent so much time thinking about me. I want you to keep thinking about me. I want you to imagine what I am going to do when I come back for you. And I am going to come back for you. After you've spent your life looking over your shoulder. After you have wondered every single day if that is the day that I'm going to come for you. One day, you'll be right.
And so he just leaves him.
Yeah.
And Davey crawls along the street until he gets picked up. A man just finds him in the road, and then Davey has his final monologue, which calls back to the first monologue. And he says, "The suburbs are where the craziest stuff happens. People hardly ever let you know who they really are. Even serial killers live next door to somebody." And we're also kind of seeing, like, it looks like Eats's family is maybe moving or something. Like
Woody's
we're kind of,
house is for sale. Yeah.
Davey's doing his paper route on his bike again, but he's got this big brace on his ankle, which I assume he'll probably have to wear for the rest of his life. And so again, it hits back at that theme of you never know what's going on behind closed doors, and I think that it really establishes that theme really well. But I also thought that the ending was so good because Mackie's punishment of Davey, he's right. It's worse than killing him.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you know, because that kid now is going to have to live the rest of his life knowing that that guy's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And that he's going to come back eventually. And when you think about that, how could you ever really get close to anybody when you would know that you were putting them in imminent danger? I mean, that just fucked that kid's whole life.
Oh, yeah. And the movie is just a barrage of depression. I mean, as he's going through his paper route, he passes Woody's house, which is, you know, for sale. Nikki passes by in the car waving goodbye. She's moving away. Yep. Eats and Faraday are coming out, and they have trashed the treehouse, and they're throwing the pieces of the treehouse down. That's gone. It's like, you know, their childhood is done. They're not even looking at him. It's like they're pissed at him. And then, you know, Mackie's house has got the police tape over it. And then he opens up the newspaper and sees the headline, which basically says the killer is still at large, all over this monologue. And that's the way the frickin' movie ends. It's at a point where you feel guilty for having had fun with this movie.
Yeah.
It took such a sharp left turn, and you're like, oh, this is this fun summer kids adventure film, and the bad guy's going to get it. And at the end of the day, you're just struck with reality. Like, nope, guess what? Most of the time, bad guy gets away. All kinds of crazy, horrible shit happens in the suburbs, and it stays crazy and horrible and never gets resolved, and destroys homes and lives and families. And there you go. Credits. I just couldn't believe the thematic 180, the trick that had been pulled on me by the end of the movie. It was unbelievable. Super dark.
Yeah.
And just left an icky feeling in my stomach.
Yes, it did. But also, I found, okay, so all of the stuff leading up to it, I thought it was fun, and I enjoyed it. And I regardless of how it turned out, I think, I kind of expected there would be a showdown, but then Mackie would probably get killed or get caught or something. That's what I was expecting.
Me too.
So it subverted my expectations. And ultimately, even though it is really dark and even though it is pretty depressing at the end, I was like, dang. I thought they really surprised me there, and I'm impressed. I'm impressed
that
they subverted my expectations in that way. And I actually think that it's a strength of the movie that it doesn't do what you expect it to do.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that comes from the actor who plays Mackie, his performance. I just think he does a great job in this. The only other thing I've ever seen him in, you mentioned Mad Men. He was in the Netflix series Glow, and played a totally different character and even looked completely different. Glow was happening around the same time as this, but in that show, he's much leaner and he plays this pretty boy, rich boy who's, funds this women's wrestling league or whatever. And I really liked him in that, but he's dopey and goofy in that. And here, he's a completely different character. And he does such a good job of playing that facade and then allowing us to see his crazy at the end. I don't know. I just have to say, overall, I thought it was a really good movie. It was a surprise. I didn't know anything about it. It was just, and this has happened to me with several movies on Shudder, which is another plug for it. You can just look around and you'll find these things that you've never heard of, both old and new. I have watched several Shudder exclusives and Shudder originals that have been made in the past couple of years, and I've just been really impressed. And I'm glad that there's a place for these kinds of movies because they typically don't get celebrated too much in the mainstream. So I'm really glad that there's, that AMC or whoever puts all this together. These are clearly people that like horror movies the way that we like horror movies, and there's good quality stuff there, and I think that this is a quality movie. It's well made, it's well written, it's well acted. I don't really have much criticism of it at all.
Well, yeah, don't get me wrong. I am not complaining about the ending. I think the ending is great. You need something different. We wanted something that's just not going to be a carbon copy of those other films we had seen before. And the fact that this got such an emotional reaction for me, and I really like the theme. And shall we say it's very apropos for today as well. I hate to dive into this territory, but we're at a time when the world isn't such a great place to be in, and a lot of people like to look back and say, "Oh, do you remember the good old days? Like, back when I was a kid in the 80s, we didn't have any of these problems. People were nice to each other. There wasn't this stuff, nothing bad ever happened," right? But no, actually, things weren't necessarily better before. Things like this were always happening. And despite, the feel-good movies of that time, we had a lot of issues. So I felt like being true to life was good. I felt like it was making a little bit of a point that way. It was a great update, in a way, of that formula. You can take this formula and you can follow it, but then kind of say something new with it. And I feel like that's what this movie did thematically. So and again, hit me at a very gut visceral level. I loved these kids. I loved spending time with them. And it just destroyed me to see one of the nicest kids of the group get brutally murdered right in front of me. And the rest of them are just going to go their own ways, I think, from here on out. And this is going to scar them for the rest of their lives. I don't wish that on anyone, but as a dramatic thing, as a movie that I'm going to be thinking about for a while, it was very, very effective. So
yeah,
I feel like we need to package this episode up and send it to Shudder. Maybe we can get them to sponsor the show.
They do have Shudder exclusive podcasts too.
Dude, somebody
maybe we need to get on that.
Somebody write some notes, a petition or something for that. All right, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this, please share it with a friend and share it with Shudder. You can tell them and all your friends that you can find us at twoguys.red40net.com. We're online. Just search us, Two Guys and a Chainsaw. Find us on Facebook. Find us on Twitter. Shoot us a note there. Give us some requests. We'd love to hear from you what you thought of this movie and this episode. If we see your request, we keep a nice long list, and we'll be sure to get to it sometime in the near future. Until that time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.